Hey, thank you all so much for being here. If I know a lot of you, but if I haven't met you, I'm Merit. First of all, I'm a faculty member here in philosophy. So I have the pleasure of introducing my colleague, Dr. Bechtel. I'll try not to talk very long. So Dr. Bechtel has a bachelor's degree in philosophy and religion from Baylor. He has a master's of divinity from Fuller Theological Seminary, a master of arts and philosophy from Loyola Marymount, and a PhD in philosophy from Texas A&M University. Dr. Bechtel started here in 2023, and just in a couple years, he's already had a really large impact. He's been really instrumental in growing our philosophy minor, which I think is really a testament to his ability to make thinkers like Derrida accessible and to like connect with students and convince them of the value of philosophy. Dr. Bechtel recently received the Outstanding Faculty Award for Excellence in Teaching from the College of Arts and Sciences. In his research, he works in continental philosophy, phenomenology, philosophy and religion, and the history of philosophy. And so he's got a lot of publications and presentations in those areas, culminating in his book, which we'll be talking about today, Death of the World, Surviving the Death of the Other. It's going to be out in paperback next month, and Dr. Bechtel will have a code if you want to get that. But yeah, I'll turn things over.
Thank you, Merit, for the great introduction. Thank you to the College of Arts and Sciences for this opportunity. Deborah Feeks for, I'm assuming this was your idea. Yeah. Thanks to Kate Gillen. Where she went? Oh, there she is. Okay. For organizing this, and your undergraduate student worker.
Ruben.
Yeah. Ruben made the flyer that many of you saw on the PPs and that I sent out on my emails. So thanks to him for doing that. And then thank you all for coming. I'm excited to see faces I know, new faces, friends, family. So these up on the screen right now. I need to say, I can't tell you that you guys are all lucky that you're getting to see me use PowerPoint. My students can attest I don't ever do this. I make them just like look at my crazy chicken scratch on the board and all catch me, right? So you're welcome for the PowerPoint, and especially to Dr. Kaiser. I didn't bring in a 40-page paper to read, although I would be much more comfortable doing it. But this will be great. So these are all quotations from philosophers, poets, theologians, and there's even a musician out there, Bon Iver, the hauntingly beautiful Halocene song, that have somehow or another made it into this book. And so we're going to come back to those. I'll have a few thoughts about each of them. So here's the book cover. And we're always told don't judge a book by its cover, right? Please, for the love of everything, judge my book by its cover. If the content of my book is half as good as this cover, then I've done a good job. I had a great team at SUNY Press that put the cover together. My sister actually found this photographer who took this photo of a statue outside of the Oklahoma City bombing memorial in Oklahoma City. There's like the big memorial that's there, but then outside it, there's this small memorial that's hosted by the St. Joseph Catholic Church there, that's across the street. And I was really moved by the whole memorial, but then like outside, this was just like incredibly captivating. And I was telling my family about it, my sister about it, and so she found photographer, his name is Richard Ebert, who took this photo, and it's a photo of Jesus weeping. That's the main statue, and Jesus is facing what looks like the Wailing Wall, but there's empty spots in the Wailing Wall to represent the death of each person in the bombing. So it's like you got this huge, like monstrous memorial there, and then the small one outside, and I was like just really moved by it. And when she heard me talking about it, she was like, I got to find something. So she found that, and I paid Richard a little bit of money. Probably should have paid him more, but I paid him what he wanted to be able to put it on the book. So, and it just turned out beautiful. So, so please judge my book by its cover. So I am in this book trying to be incredibly faithful to a particular experience, a particular phenomenon. And that phenomenon is beautifully summed up by Jacques Derrida, who you're going to hear a good amount from today, both in name and just kind of in the background of a lot of what I'm talking about. So Jacques Derrida was a French philosopher, said a whole lot of things. But he in 2003, this was the year before he died of pancreatic cancer, he was giving a memorial session for one of his friends that he had a contentious relationship with, another philosopher. And in that memorial, he says that life adheres to a fatal and inflexible law. One of two friends will always see the other die. And so this is the experience, the phenomenon that I, in this book, am trying to pay extra careful attention to and to lay out what is happening to us when we experience the death of someone. And it is grounded in what we might call an inhabited philosophical approach, what I will later call phenomenology, but I'm going to try to keep the philosophical terms to a minimum because outside of undergraduate students and one other faculty member, I don't think anyone is a philosopher. So I'm going to keep two of you, but I'm going to keep it to a minimum. But an inhabited philosophical approach, meaning I know this phenomenon from the inside, right? There was a particular experience. A dear friend of mine and mentor, when I was an undergrad, died tragically. And as I told Lida last week, it turned my world upside down, but not in a good way, right? And all of a sudden, I started finding in my academic journey that I kept coming back to this like experience and trying to make sense of like what happened to me, what happened to people that I loved, what happened to the community that saw this thing happen. And so I was, not intentionally, but just kind of inadvertently, I just kept coming back to this. And so my research was coming from my life experience, and that research was helping me rethink my life experience. And that's kind of this whole inhabited philosophical approach that we'll be going through together today. Okay. And so before we get to all of my ideas, okay, because I'm going to give you plenty of those, and I do need to keep an eye on the clock. Hopefully we'll get through all of it, but we'll just see. But before we get to my ideas, I want to get you guys thinking, okay? Because part of this is I want you to be philosophers with me, where philosophy is about thinking carefully about your life, thinking carefully about your experience. And you may not have all the like crazy terms and tools and know all the stuff that's up here for me to think through it, but you've got the thing that matters the most, and that is your experience. Okay? So like just for a moment, I'm sure we've all experienced the death of someone. Maybe it was a pet, maybe it was a family member, a loved one, but just kind of like, let their absence kind of fill the room, right? Fill the space of your mind. And now we probably should all go talk to our therapist, right? Or cry, or both. But I want you to notice something about your experience, okay? We're often told, and we get this from couple of particular places, I think, but we're often told that when someone dies, it's something that you just get over, And like, if you don't get over it, people are annoyed that like, you're not over it, Like, it's been 3 years, really? And you still are like struggling? Like, what's up with that, right? So we're often told this. One of the first pieces in the history of philosophy, history of psychology even, where we get this line of thinking is an essay by Sigmund Freud called Mourning and Melancholy. Okay? And in this, he sets up this dichotomy between normal mourning is when someone dies and you go through the process of mourning them and then you move past it. You get over it. He doesn't use that language, but I think colloquially, just kind of in the everyday language, it gets passed down that, yeah, you mourn them and then you're done. Off we go to normal life, right? And then he says, but there are some of us that when someone dies, we're mourning them and we get stuck. And we can't seem to quite get past it. And that's abnormal mourning, which he calls melancholy or melancholy. Now, Freud did end up changing his mind about melancholia, so that later in his works, he started to see how this is an important part of mourning. But like it was kind of set in stone with this famous essay, Mourning and Melancholy. Fast forward to today, any psychologists in the room? Future psychologists in the room? Okay. I'm not coming out against you guys. I'm not doing that. But I am going to be critical of the DSM. Okay. Which some of you might be, yes, leave them think of else. So the DSM is like the diagnostic book. It's about this thick, and I think it's getting thicker every year. But the DSM is like the diagnostic book in psychology. It's really, really important because basically if something is in there, then there's a planned treatment and insurance will pay for it, right? So it's really, really important for those reasons. But there's been a new update to it in the last few years where they're talking about what's called prolonged grief disorder, which is just my theory, is just Freud put back into the DSM. Now, again, it's good. You can get treatment for it. Insurance will pay for it. But what does it communicate? That if you go, and the timeline, I think, is 6 to 8 months. If you go 8 months and you're not over the grieving, the mourning process, it's a disorder. Right? So, like, we're all disordered right now. Right? We're not doing the normal mourning thing. So that's the first thing I want you to notice about your experience is death isn't something that we just get over. Right? It's something we wrestle with. And I want to show you in this talk why that's the case. And why it's normal. It's not disorderly. It just is. Right? The second thing that I want you to notice about your own experience is that death permeates. When someone dies, it permeates everything in life. It permeates how you think about yourself, like who you are, who am I in the aftermath of this. It permeates what do I do now in the world? That's the question of ethics, responsibility, right? And it can even change like the things you hope for, which sounds religious, right? Doesn't have to be religious, but like my wife and I know someone, this happened a few years ago, 3 or so years ago. She was married for, I don't know, one of those like 50-year marriages. She was in her 80s, I think, and she was deeply religious, Christian. Her husband dies. And all of a sudden, she finds herself, she's lived most of her life, more of her life as a Christian, and she finds herself questioning the foundations of her own faith, right? All because her husband died. And so, like, that can change what you hope for. Now, as far as I know, she's still a Christian. I don't know how, I never got an update on that. But just thinking through this, like, death just reaches into all parts of our life. And it's not something that you just get up. Okay? Everybody with me? All right. So revisiting these quotations, right? As you think about your own experience, you might read this passage from Heraclitus. I'll say more about that in a moment. But like you start to notice some relationship between life and death, right? You may read the quotation from Augustine. Augustine's friend Nebridius dies. And he looks out at the world and he's like, look, everything in the world after this is a cruel torment. So like, talk about death permeating everything, right? Bon Iver begins this song with just I'm going to write an essay where this is either the title or the epigraph, but some way, baby, it's part of me apart from me. I think about that, right? That's like a radical transformation of yourself because something connected to this other person who's in you is now gone, right? Or Paul Celan, a French-born, German-speaking poet whose family was all killed in the Holocaust. And when his son dies, he writes this just like heart-wrenching series of poems, one of which here at the end of that poem, he says, "The world is gone, I must carry you." You kind of see where the title of my book comes from, right? Derrida again, expressing that there's something about mourning that's always there with us, and that living life, surviving, just is this act of mourning. And so you've got living on and mourning coming together. We'll get back to that by the end of the talk. And then Emily Dickinson writes this great poem about, I don't know the story behind it, but I think it was probably someone she knew who died, who was a big reader, because she talks about like picking up the book after the loved one had died, and the person had written things in the margins. My students know that as flagging, right? Had written all these things in the margins. And she says that, look, this book means something more because death sets a thing significant, right? Just, whoa. So, like, just get over it, right? Good luck. So here's what I'm doing. I think this is the most philosophical language I've used today. At least I hope. So what I'm doing in the book is I am providing what is called a phenomenology of what is happening to us when we survive the death of the other. So two things here. This word phenomenology, don't be scared by it. Here's what it means. It means I'm giving a description. I'm trying to describe, attend to this experience and laying out, here's what happens when we go through this. Okay? And the goal of any phenomenology, the goal of this description, is to maybe let you see your experience for the first time, where you see it with what one philosopher calls, you see it with rinsed eyes, right? You just put Visine in, and it's like everything's clear. Or you just see it more clearly, like, oh, yeah, all that is the case. I didn't have the language for it. Now I do. That's the goal of this fancy word phenomenology. Okay. The second part of this is the term death of the other. What's going on there? Why not death of a person? Why not death of someone? So in the type of philosophy that I do, this name, the other, is deeply, deeply important. Okay. It has a long tradition. We don't need to get into that. But basically, the other is anything outside of you that lays claim on who you are and your responsibility. That's pretty much what it means. So the other is anything outside of you that lays claim to who you are and your responsibility. Okay? So that could be your dog, your cat, your gerbil, your goldfish. It could be an animal. Okay? Some people would even claim that it could be a plant, right? It could be it could be a human. Okay, so a human animal. Right? It could also be the divine. It could be God. Right? So remember, the person who's like questioning her whole faith because her husband of 50 years dies. So like when the other dies, I'm trying to attend to what's happening when that's going on. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's what I'm up to. Now, in order to really, I think, appreciate where my particular claims are going to come from, I think I need to do a little bit of history of philosophy for you. So this will be an all too brief history of death and Western philosophy. Okay? And here is where I really need to watch my time, especially as I look down now, because I could talk at length about any one of these quotations. And those of you in my intro to philosophy class, you're going to get an earful about the first one next week. So the name of the bow is life, but its work is death, Heraclitus. So won't get into the details, but he's talking about the hunting bow. Okay? And what does the hunting bow do when it's used? It brings death to the animal or to the enemy. Right? And in doing so, what does it bring to the person who bears the bow? Life. Right? So this is like one of the first moments. It is the first moment in the history of Western philosophy where the themes of life and death come into relation to one another. Okay? Then, of course, Plato comes along and he tells us the one aim of those who practice philosophy in the proper manner is to practice for dying and death. So Plato writes that in the 5th, 4th century BCE. Michel de Montaigne comes along in the 6th century CE and says something very similar, although it might be a little different, that practicing philosophy is learning to die. So again, like life, death brought into relation in a different way, but again, we won't go into the detail. Epicurus says something crazy. He says, look, we're all afraid of death. You shouldn't be afraid of death. Why? Because as long as we exist, death does not. And the moment death does exist, we do not. So the good news is, we're not there when we die, right? We don't experience it. So don't waste your time worrying about it, right? Easy as that. Now, this, then, here we're making an impossible historical leap, but like this way of thinking about death, it reaches a like huge climax in the 20th century in a book called Being in Time by the German philosopher Martin Heidegger. And a lot of things we could say about this. I'm going to keep it as brief as I can, but this is like a knockout of a sentence. Okay? So death, I lied, this is the most philosophical thing in the slide. I just read it and I'm like, uh-oh. Death is ontologically constituted by mindless and existence. Okay, forget all the language for a moment, right? What he's saying here is if we want to know what death means, okay? Death is always mine, meaning there's not a single one of you here or in history that can take my death away from me. It's only mine to die, right? Now, one of you might take a bullet for me, and I'm grateful for it, right? And at that time, you saved me from my death, right? But eventually, it's just mine, right? Not yours. Just like your death is yours, and not anyone else's, right? Second part of this. So death is always mine, so it always belongs to the singular individual. And the way that it really is mine is because it is part of my existence. Where Heidegger means, and this is pretty morbid, but like if we look back to our own past, we're born into the world, right? The birth cry, our first breath. Guess what we have the potential to do? Die. Right? So Heidegger quotes somebody and he says, as soon as we're born, we're old enough to die. So we find in our existence, death is there at the beginning. When we look forward to everything we're going to accomplish in life, all of the things that we hope to do, all the things we're anxious about, right? We can like try to accomplish all of those things, but there's something hanging over, looming over our future that holds the trump card to everything else. And it's the same thing that was there in the beginning, our death, right? It's coming. Yeah. So here we are in the present. And like, we've got a choice. Our death was there in the past. It's there in the future. What do we do now? Do we cover it up, ignore it, numb ourselves from it? Or do we anxiously embrace it and like do something with it? And Heidegger says we should be anxious about our own death. Epicurus was wrong. We're anxious for a reason, so harness it. Now, what do you notice about these 4 quotations? I'll tell you. They're all about my death, right? Every single one of these has been a way to reflect on our own mortality, what can we do about that? So the big question comes up, well, come on, what about other people dying, right? Hello? What about mourning? Isn't this important? And the craziest thing about Heidegger's book, it's brilliant. Being in Time is like one of the most brilliant books that's been written in the history of philosophy. He says some amazing things about mourning. And then just waves them off and says, though all this may be true, when someone dies, we're just nearby. Like, it doesn't really have an effect on who we are. It doesn't shape our existence the way that our own death was. We're just there. That's it. So when I read that, my first year of my PhD program, I thought, that's bullshit, right? That was not my experience, right? Not your experience, as I'm trying to get you to think about it. So I don't know why I said that, but I know what it's done in terms of my thinking, right? So there's three figures that have like really shaped the way that I think about what about the death of others, what about mourning. Simone de Beauvoir, she's an existentialist philosopher. She wrote this like brutal, I don't know why it's called A Very Easy Death. She answers that in her book, but it's a memoir about her mother dying. And oh, golly, like it's just heartrending. So she wasn't writing this against Heidegger, as far as I know. Maybe she was, but like it's certainly a response. Like, oh, look, I'm not just nearby, right? Here's a memoir that proves them. Levinas could say a million things about him, but he kind of builds his whole philosophy around, look, the Epicurean line. We're not there when we die, right? We're there when the other dies. And so let's not think as much about our own death. Let's think about the death of other people. And then Derrida, and the way that Derrida does, he like sharpens that point and just like nails it on the head with a lot of things that he wrote, but especially he wrote a series of eulogies for people, not at their actual funerals, but like just kind of in the aftermath of his friends and fellow philosophers dying. So these three figures have had a tremendous impact on how I'm thinking about what we're about to go through. Okay. So this brings me to my claims. First off, the death of the other is what I'm calling an event. Okay. Now there's three parts of my book. The most challenging part of the whole book is part one. And I tell people who don't really read philosophy to read the preface, read the introduction, go to the conclusion, and if you want more, start at chapter 3 and read the rest. Okay? Because the first 3 chapters, but especially the first 2 chapters that are all in part 1, they're like only things that probably like 0.00001% of people care. Okay? I happen to be part of that, and so are my reviewers, and so are some of the people that I'm writing to. So, it had to be in there. But basically what I'm doing in the first part is explaining, here's what an event is. And we could have a whole 2-semester seminar on that, banging our heads against some of the most difficult philosophy in 19th and 21st century German and French philosophy, but we don't have time for that, right? So what is an event? An event is a happening. It's something that happens. It could be something ongoing, okay? And the nature of it is such that you really only notice it in its aftermath. Okay? Because there's 3 things that philosophers of the event seem to agree upon. An event is unexpected. When you try to make sense of it, your rational capacities fail to make sense of it. And number 3, in its wake, it transforms everything around. So unexpected, without reason, and transformative. Okay? Derrida calls those the symptoms of an event. So it's happened, you're going through it. Here's the symptoms that you call. So that's part 1, and then parts 2 and 3, I'm laying out those 3 claims. That the death of the other is an event because its happening is unexpected, its happening is without reason, and its happening transforms both the space and the time of the world. Okay? I have 20 minutes to go through all three of them. We'll see how far we get. Okay? So first off, the death of the other is unexpected. So there's three ways we could talk about something unexpected. You couldn't see it coming ahead of time. So like you couldn't look into the horizon up from the Panhandle in Texas, and you can see as far as you can see in the Panhandles. And an event is something that you would never see coming on the horizon, even in the Panhandle. Number two, another way to say that is, well, if you can't see it coming, you can't prepare for it. And number three, when it hits you, when it befalls you, it's a surprise. Right? All three different ways to talk about something unexpected. And every death of the other is unexpected. To which you might be thinking, really? And the answer is yes, and then let's just move on. No. So it would be crazy to make this claim, right? If the death of the other were just the movement from someone being alive to them no longer being alive, right? That would be like the medical definition of death, or the demise of someone. If that's all death was, well then no, not every death is unexpected. The tragic ones are, right? Because, yeah, you couldn't see that coming and it happened. Okay, I was surprised by it. But what about you get a medical diagnosis and you're told you got 6 months, you got 3 months, you got 5 years, right? And even if they're wrong, right, you still know, oh, well, that possibility in the future, it's much closer to the present, right? So it'd be crazy to make this claim if by death I meant just the shifting from alive to not alive. But that's not what the death of the other just is. Okay? Because death includes, the person dies, maybe you live with the person, and then you go home. Right? Still going on. You see that bowl of milk in the sink, right? And you're like, I wish they were here to still do that, even though it annoys the heck out of them. Or you see their book, that's a thing significant. You see the book, and it's not over. Funeral might be, but the death is not. It's still going on. Or you think about their laugh, right? There it is. Not over. Gabriel Garcia Marquez wrote this great book called Love in the Time of Cholera. And the protagonist, Fermina Daza, her husband died. And she talks about being in the house and smelling him in the house, right? Not just the demise of the person, right? Or you see someone, random person on a bus, public transit, child, and you see the person in them, right? Right there. So the death is not just the demise of a person. It's all of this. And we're never ready for that stuff, right? It hits you unexpectedly. Make sense? Okay. Next up. The death of the other is without reason. So there's an inspiration here. There's a 17th century German priest and mystic. His monk name was Angelus Silesius. And he wrote a series of poems in the book, The Cherubim Wanderer. And a series of those are just about a rose. And he says at one point that the rose is without wine. It blooms while it blooms. And what his poem brings up is a distinction between how versus why. right? We can explain, and some of you probably could explain it a lot better than me, how a rose blooms. But my version of it, because I've forgotten everything from college about the photosynthetic process, but my version of it is, well, you give the rose good soil, water, and sunlight, and it blooms, right? That's how it blooms, right? But that explanation of how is not an explanation of why. Why does it do that? And we can think of that difference between the why and the how in two different ways. So on the one hand, the rose doesn't care, right? We might care because we're trying to like raise the roses to fill our garden, or we're trying to study the rose scientifically. But the rose doesn't care how it does what it does or why it does what it does. It just blooms while it blooms, right? We care, it doesn't. So it's without why. The second reason, though, that it's with why is that, okay, given that positive account, sunlight, soil, water, why bloom? Why not something else? Or like when Derrida brings this up, when we experience the death of someone, like tears come, right? And we know how that happens. We can explain it physiologically. Why tears instead of something else? So we can explain how things happen, but not always why something's happening. Okay? And so this without why means that it's outside of causal explanation. The how is not, but the why is. Another way to talk about that is that it's outside calculative rationality, or the PSR, which stands for the principle of sufficient reason, which states for everything that is, there must be a reason for why it is. Okay? Which the most famous version of that today is everything happens for a reason. Right? So how someone dies has a causal explanation. Cancer, heart attack, died in surgery, car wreck, old age, dementia, on and on and on and on it goes, right? Why someone dies is not. Which is why a religious person all their life can experience the death of someone dear to them and ask themselves, but why? They've got an explanation, right? Their religion would give them that. But like when it happens, they find themselves like trapped, like, oh, well, it's not good enough. I really need to know why. And sometimes in life we encounter things that they don't fit that. They just are like the rose. They bloom while they bloom. Third, I'm running out of time. The death of the other transforms the world. So we got to define some terms here. Be good philosophers. What do I mean by the world? I don't mean the earth. Okay, the earth can be the world, as we'll see, but the world in this context is not the earth. Okay, the world in this setting means any context of meaning, any place where meaning happens. So guess what we are in right now? A world, right? The classrooms you just came from, the cars you just came from, the highway that you just came from, flipping off all the bad San Antonio drivers, right? All of those are worlds. So it's any context of meaning, any place where meaning happens. Okay? That means that these worlds are inherently relational. So very rarely, if ever, is there just my world, right? As we're about to see, it's caught up with all kinds of things. And it is very rarely the case that it's singular. So even we take this world right here, this is not just one world right now. Because the way this gets worked out, and this is some more language from Heidegger, this idea of self-world, with-world, surrounding world. So here's what that looks like. Okay. So here each of us is, right? We've got our own self-identities with our own like personal set of values, beliefs, thoughts, etc. Right? But like each of us is connected to the people that we live with, right? The books that you read, the disciplines that you study, and that would be your with world, the world that you have with others in that world. And then like with those others, you belong to this political group, that political group, this religious group, this other religious group, this club, that club, this part of San Antonio. You see the idea, right? So you've got your self world, your world with others, and then that's embedded in this larger context of meaning called the surrounding world. Okay. And so like here I am, and I have with me, all contained within me, all my with worlds and surrounding worlds right here. And you've got it, and you've got it, and you've got it, and you've got it, you've got it, right? So this isn't just one world that we're in. It's a world embedded in a series, perhaps in an infinite number of worlds. And we don't even have to do string theory or crazy physics, right? To like talk about or crazy philosophical things called possible. We've got them all right here, right? And so the world is this inherently relational, never singular idea of where meaning happens. In the book, I come up with this term called the pluralized world. I kind of draw this from Jean-Luc Nancy, another French philosopher. But we can talk about the world, but when we do, the implication is, well, it's always pluralized, right? So we can talk about the earth as a world, but contained in it is a myriad of worlds, right? We can talk about the world in this class for me, but it's already assuming there's this these other worlds teeming within, right? So when I say that the world dies when the other dies, it's this pluralized world that dies, right? Not like the earth somehow. That would be quite impressive. And that could mean the death of the world could mean maybe the other dies and you realize, oh, like there's all these myriad worlds around us. So the death of the other is the death of the phantasm of a singular world. So it could be that. Okay. It can mean that when the other dies, all of what the world was to them died with. It can also mean what my world was because of the other. That now has died with. Everybody see that? So lots of like meaning going on here with this idea of the death of the world, the death of the pluralism. Now, there are two axes along which the death of the world happens. Okay. We'll do two more slides, and I have a few more, but we'll see those. So there's the death of the world as I'm talking about it, and that death of the world happens along two axes, two aspects of it. The first is what I'm calling the spatiality of the world after the death of the other. Okay? Now, if you're paying attention, you'll notice I switched the terms from space to spatiality. That wasn't a mistake. Okay? Because we're all familiar with space, right? That's the extension of things in 3 dimensions. And I don't mean that when someone dies, it changes somehow the 3-dimensional reality of space. Okay? Although, again, that could be quite cool. Or even more frightening, I don't know. Instead, when the world dies, what happens is its spatiality is transformed. So remember, the world is any context of meaning. what makes it possible for us to form meaning in any world is what is called spatiality, right? I think one of the helpful ways to think of this is what we can call the giving place to something. Okay, so my wife and I have moved quite a bit in our lives together, and every time we move, like the place we give to things in the kitchen, right, is always like the big discussion, right? And like notice how it happens, right? So like you decide, all right, this cabinet is going to have the plates and bowls, right? And because of the place where it is, you wouldn't put the silverware over here, right? That would be crazy. Because like the relationality of these things means, well, if this is the place for this, then like obviously the drawer here should have silver, right? And then maybe you have cups here so that you can kind of do it all right there. Some of you are like, oh my gosh, I have to completely redo my kitchen. But then it's like, well, what about coffee? We put coffee mugs there. Well, there's no place for the coffee machine here, but there's a place for the coffee machine over here. So why would we put the coffee cups here when like the place for them is over here, right? And when you don't have these things figured out right, it's like gears, like things are like not working properly, right? Because the spatiality of things, it entails that the relational part of like where things are in the kitchen, like where things work for you, for your spouse, for others. And so like spatiality is like that thing that makes possible this ability to form meaning in the kitchen, right? And it's that spatiality that gets transformed. Not three-dimensional space, right? But the spatiality of things. You might also think of this as like the giving place to something would be the difference between a home and a house, or a home and a place where you stay. Right? So, where a thing or a person or other people come to the specific meaning that they have on account of the various relations, that's spatiality. Okay? Gerard Manley Hopkins in his poetry, he uses the word inscape to talk about the same thing. That doesn't mean anything to you, don't worry. We can do this kind of giving place in the aftermath of the death of the other, both from them, so like the dead themselves are having this impact on the spatiality of things. We can do it with them, or we can do it to them. Okay, so some quick examples. Survivor trees. The Oklahoma City Bombing Memorial has a famous tree, and they call it the Survivor Tree. Okay? It's a massive tree and a huge memorial. It sits on kind of the highest point. It was there when the bomb went off. The debris from the building hit it and put like cuts in it, so it has the scars of the event. And it's like the survivor that reminds the people who come about what happened. Right? It was there, it witnessed it. So there's a way in which when the other dies, that death can leave a material, physical impact on the world itself, on the earth itself, quite literally, right? Which then gives rise to some of the meaning in the pluralized world for us. There's also, after the bombings of Hiroshima, I don't speak Japanese, but they created a new word for the trees that survived the bombing, and they called them bombed out trees, survivor trees, right? So again, giving place can happen from the dead. Then there's this huge discussion, somebody asked about it in the Q&A, but the epigenetic transference of grief. so that, and here I'm using grief and trauma kind of interchangeably, just so you kind of know how I'm thinking about it. But if you know anything about this, we've got our genome, our DNA sequence, right? And it doesn't change, but then kind of layered on top of it or in relation to it is the epigenome. And that tells the DNA like which parts to turn on and turn off so that we can have the same DNA in our eyes as in our hearts, but yet they're different tissues, they're different organs, right? And so epigenome is like the thing that's turning things on and off. And it turns out the epigenome is open to the outside. It's open to being affected by trauma, grief being an example of trauma. Lots of things to say about that. It's actually one of the coolest things I discovered in the process of writing a book. So there you've got the dead who are quite literally giving place like with us, right? And you transfer that to your progeny. Right? Second and third generation is what the studies are showing. Pretty well. So again, just get over it. Right? You're not carrying it with you. Actually, you are in your epigenome. And then obviously to the death. So building what some people call memory landscapes. So this might be like your own personal memorial to somebody, or it might be, the huge kind of memorial that we have for national tragedies in our own country. But that would be giving place to that. One more slide. I'm good, and then we'll check in. Okay. So that's how the death of the other transforms the spatiality of the world. The second axis of this death of the world would be the temporality of the world. And now you know I already have tricks up my sleeve, so you probably noticed the switch from time to temporality. Time, past, present, future. All familiar with that. We talked about this in one of my classes today. The timeline, right? We represent time with the line. The past was before us. The present is now. The future is what is to come, right? And that tends to be how we think of time. But if we pay attention, time is rarely that, okay? Time is more what can be called temporality. And this would be our lived experience of time. So the kind of time that we notice unfolding in our own lives throughout our life. Okay? And that is far from the past is back there, the present is unfolding now, and the future is to come. And so my claim is that the death of the other doesn't transform time, but it transforms our lived experience of kind of to a heightened degree. And so this kind of temporality would be non-linear, not moving in the direction of the timeline, but instead, and this is one of my favorite sentences, I think, in the history of philosophy, the future, like just think about it, right? The future makes present by having been. That means the future's in the past, right? Because it can only make present if it's been in the past, right? And it's the future that's actually impacting now because it was in the past, right? It's like, whoa, this is insane, right? And Heidegger's famous example of this is our own death, which we already kind of talked about it. It's there when we're born, it's in there in our future. So the future already has been, right? And what do we do now? Do we ignore it? Do we anxiously embrace it, decide to finally do something important in our lives, or what do we do? So this kind of temporality, this nonlinear temporality, the future making present by having been, that's what I'm claiming happens to us when the other dies. Okay, it transforms our relation to the past, the future, and to the present. And you can see Heidegger had all the tools there, right, to lay this out. And yet he just says we're just nearby when the other dies. So, it's 50 minutes, okay? We've got 30 minutes left. How about I summarize how death impacts the past, the future, the present? Okay. Couple minutes and then conclusion. Sound good? Okay. I'm not going to go through the slides because I'll just keep talking. So the past. It's a great line by the author William Faulkner. Anyone ever read The Requiem of a Nun? Yeah. He says the past is never past. I read that and I was like, oh my gosh, that's going in the book. So the other might die in the past, right? And it's written on the death certificate. Passed away past. So of course it happened in the past. But as we've been discussing, you go home, you see the book, you have memories. It ain't staying in the past. It's right here with you. And it's shaping your own future. So you have someone close to you who dies. So now we're talking about the future. And the future is full of possibilities, things that might happen, things that might not happen. And someone close to you dies and you had a trip planned with that person, right? That future possibility is now impossible. Will not happen. Right? There are other possibilities that when the person dies, when they don't happen in the future anymore, like think about a loved one who dies and you had your first Thanksgiving without, right? That Thanksgiving is with them is impossible, but in being impossible, it rewrites everything about that Thanksgiving and everything about future Thanksgiving as you think about it, right? So that's a different kind of like impossibility that we won't get into. But you can kind of see the difference, right? And then here we are in the present. And to quote Hamlet, in a time out of joint, right? In the present, out of joint. We've got the past that's come back to haunt our future and thereby our present. The future is making present by having been because of all of this. And what do? We should probably cry, but we should definitely mourn, right? And not feel bad about it being 15, 16, 20 years later and the anniversary rolls around and, you can't get out of bed. Disorderly, I wouldn't call it that. I just call it mourning, right? You are surviving the death of the other. You are living on. That's what surviving means. You are living on after the death of the other. And so you have a responsibility for mourning. Of course, there's always the possibility that like that mourning process is just too much. And like find yourself in deep trouble and even mark the end of some people, right? That's when the death of the other becomes a kind of poison. But the hope is, at least for me, is that there can be a promise after the death of the other. A promise that might be different life, but a kind of afterlife now, which is one way to talk about survival. It's an afterlife, life after. And so, the death of the other is an event. The loss transforms the spatiality and temporality of the world for a survivor, hence it being the kind of event that we're talking about. And it's really that transformation, spatiality and temporality, that is the unexpected and without reason aspect of it. So what is lost when the other dies is much more than just a physical presence. The meaning given to the world from with the other is lost too. So the death of the other is then a death of the world. 30% off paperback.